Okay, oops, hang on a second here. Okay, so I said in a previous video that we were going to focus specifically on this word Raqia. I'm gonna wait for myself to come back into focus here. There we go. I said that we were going to focus specifically on this word Raqia or Raqia, um, because it speaks to probably, okay. Let's see, how do I say this? If we can establish that Genesis 1 is talking about the creation of an earth that has a solid sky, or if we can establish that the overall picture of creation that is painted in Genesis 1, and more than just Genesis 1, but the early parts of Genesis and reference in other parts throughout the Old Testament, if we can paint the picture that the Israelites at the time and throughout at least much of their history believed in a solid sky, that there was an actual physical barrier above their heads keeping the rain out above them, then that alone essentially establishes that Genesis 1 is not a literal account of creation. Now, Genesis 1 is not a literal account of creation. Okay, I have mentioned over and over again in these videos that it tells a different story for a different purpose to a different audience. I've also mentioned that the Old Testament itself has other creation accounts in it that contain information that's not in Genesis 1. We don't argue about those. So Genesis 1 is not meant to be literal, and it's not meant to be a complete account of how God made the world. It is, or the creation of the world. It's not meant to be an account of the material process, the physical process by which God made the world, by which He arranged the atoms together to make it. It is not. In fact, as I said earlier in some other video, in fact, to a certain degree, it's explicitly designed not to do that, because some of the other creation accounts from the area at that time, the Israelites would have been at least somewhat familiar with, did explain the material origins of the world. There was an evil serpent god or whatever that the good God killed and made the world out of, or the gods had sex and produced the world, or one god may have just made the world by himself out of his semen, or something along those lines. Other creation accounts around the Israelites did try to explain the material origin of the world around them and throughout the rest of the world. If you broaden your horizon and look at the myths of the religions of other regions around the world, not just this region of what we now call the Middle East, the Levant or whatever. You go to Europe, you go down to Africa, well, we know the African myths at least. You go into East Asia, Japan, the Aborigines in Australia, the North and South Americans. Okay, many of those other cultures did explain the process by which the world that they knew around them came to be. The material process. The Genesis account, almost to a degree, explicitly goes against doing this and just says that God said it. God said it and it was so. He said it and it happened. It doesn't explain exactly what He was doing to make it happen. He just said it and it happened. So trying to insist that Genesis 1 reveals to us in the 21st century, 3,500 plus years later, the material process by which God put together the atoms that make up the world is way beyond what Genesis 1 is actually trying to say. And again, there are other creation accounts in the Old Testament that contain information that's not even in Genesis 1, and we don't even think about those. Most of you don't even know about them. So we fight over Genesis 1, but this is a fight that we do not need to be picking. The concept, now there's many things that we could talk about, like again the whole idea of the sea creatures, the oceans themselves, God not fighting them, not God speaking them into being. There's many ways in which Genesis 1 can be established as being an account of creation with Israel's God first and foremost versus the gods of the other nations around Israel. But the idea that the sun and the moon, which are not named specifically as such in Genesis 1, are both identified as sources of light, even though the moon does not actually produce light. So that's scientifically inaccurate right there. If we're trying to insist that Genesis 1 is literally true, well, it can't be, because we know the moon doesn't produce its own light. So to explain it as a source of light, we have to say, well, it just reflects the sun's light. That's true, it does. But it doesn't produce its own light. So therefore, it can't be literally called a light. So if that's not literally true, what else in Genesis 1 is not literally true? So there's many ways you can go about this. And like I said, the picture that's being painted, and there, not just in this one section of text, but in the early chapters of Genesis in general, and really throughout the Old Testament, is that there was an ocean above and an ocean below that was separated from each other by this sky, this dome that was called the sky. Then we'll get to this in a moment. And that during the flood, God removed this barrier separation. He opened the windows in this dome to allow the ocean from above, the waters above, to come crashing down. And he opened the floodgates of the deep to allow the waters from below to come surging up. Okay, so he uncreated his own creation and returned it back to a watery mess, like it was in Genesis 1:2, to judge human sin. And then he blew the water away again and reestablished order in creation and said he was never going to do that again. That's a picture that's being painted, and if we get caught up in all these details and try to say how it means something today, 3,600 years later, and that is so far beyond what the text is actually saying, that it's honestly kind of silly that and Christians in general over the centuries didn't do this. This is actually a fairly new phenomenon. For many centuries, Christians did not necessarily view these things the way that we do today, the way we have for the last 100 or so years. We have been put in a very defensive position ever since the 1800s or so, when the Enlightenment came along, and the smart German scholars started attacking the scriptures and saying, well, we don't think they really came together the way they say they did. And then, of course, Darwin formed his theory of evolution, and then that goes on from there. So for the last 150 years or so, we've been in a very defensive position, and we have adopted some stances and taken some stances that in past centuries Christians didn't have. Some of these things I'm saying now actually were commonly believed by the church and by Christians in centuries past. And so we have taken some of these positions as a reflexive defensive stance against evolution, against some other things that have been coming along in the last couple hundred years. And instead of reevaluating our own stance, we're hardening ourselves and saying, well, we're going to have to defend ourselves even more against this constant onslaught. And now there may be some things in which we do need to do that. Okay, there may be some areas in the Christian life where we are called to do that sort of thing, but this is not one of them. This is a conflict that does not need to be had, a fight that does not need to be fought. Now, we could go on about this dome concept, or this metallic sheet. And when you think of a dome, maybe you think of like a thick, hard surface, or a thick, huge surface. Maybe we should think only more like of a sheet, like a tent. We're going to find some images, some verses in the Bible that speak of imagery of the sky being sort of like a tent. So maybe it's less so much of a hard. We think of dome and think of like a hard covering for a building, like a huge sports dome or something like that. Maybe it's not that. Maybe it's just like a thin sheet, almost like a blanket-like sheet stretched out from the sky, canopy or sorts. At any rate, if we can establish that the creation account, that's the picture that's being painted for us in the early chapters of Genesis and in other places in the Old Testament, speaks of an ocean above and an ocean below that's being held apart by something that's forcibly keeping the waters out from above, then we'll know that the creation account in Genesis is not attempting to be what we would call today scientifically accurate. That's a challenge maybe to not necessarily our faith, but our assumptions about what we think should be our faith. I think maybe we should challenge our own assumptions about some of these things rather than take these reflexive defensive positions and constantly engage in this. There are some things that might be worth fighting for, but I don't believe this is one of them. So I could go on. We could go on article and article and paragraph after paragraph and book after book. I mean, we could go back and forth on this a lot. We could do a whole video series just about this topic. There are other things we could talk about too. Like I said about the sun and the moon, and the fact that the moon is not a source of light, even though Genesis seems to indicate it is. It's like there are other things we go into too, but this is a big one, and we could go into this just in endless depths. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to read some of it here. I'm going to explain my point again. If this is something that you're really struggling with, if this is something that whoever you are, and I don't have a clue who might actually see this someday. But if you really, really have a hard time with this, and this is something that it just rattles you, and you just don't know, you just don't want to hear this, you don't want to accept it, I just say, look it up yourself. That's what I did. My response to this 10 or so years ago, when I first heard it, was to be shaken. When I first came across this, I'd say about 10 years ago or so again, yeah, I was the same. It shook me. It was like, huh? I had just taken some of these things I've been hearing for all my life, and just was like, what are you talking about? That's how I was. But I've spent years then looking into it, and I've come to the conclusion where I think, well, no, it's okay if Genesis 1 is not to be taken literally from our point of view today. That is okay. That does not undermine my faith in the entire Bible. Okay. There are some things that might. Okay, there are some things that are worth fighting over, that are worth defending, that are worth putting up a fight to defend. This, honestly, is not one of them. Okay, so I'm going to be reading an article from a guy named Peter Enns. He has written some books. I've mentioned one of his books before, Incarnation, Inspiration. Some people don't like Peter Enns. Of course, anybody who puts forth this sort of idea is going to get heat from some people. It's just going to happen no matter what. And I don't really remember much about the book that I read from him. Again, this was about 10 years ago when I read this. But the key thing that I took away from that I've kept holding on to, kept in my mind, that I'm going to mention again here, is that if we believe, and I do believe, and I believe most of my listeners, whoever you would be, do believe this too. If we believe that Jesus, the Messiah, is human, is God incarnate, God in human flesh, is fully human and fully God at the same time, then why can't we believe that the scriptures they left behind were the work of both God and man too? God spoke, divinely inspired these scriptures, but he used human authors to write them down and spread them and distribute them. So why can't we not view the Bible itself as a product both fully divine and fully human? And that was something that we focus so much on this inspired by God, or God, all scripture is God breathed, and we I think minimize and downplay the human involvement in the production and distribution of these scriptures to a degree that I think causes us to distort the meaning of the text. Because in our view, then, that gives us permission to kind of overlook the human authors and the human context behind these books, saying that, well, God is speaking to me directly through these inspired scriptures. And he is speaking to you directly, but he's doing it through a human author. Okay? He is doing that, but through a human author, one who's been dead for centuries, you'll never meet in this life. So you have to understand what that guy is saying in order to understand what God is saying through that guy. And that's hard. That's hard. Okay, I understand the context is difficult. I think a lot of times we just don't really want to do that. I said at the very beginning of this video series, I talked about daily devotionals and how I have reached a point in my life where I'm past the need for such things. I think that a lot of us have settled for a daily devotional type Bible reading, where we just read a chapter a day, we pray about it, and we move on. And we don't think about heart any more deeply than that. We don't really want to. I think a lot of us don't really want to think about it more deeply than that. We're okay with our surface level daily devotional reading, and that's it. So we don't think about the context. We don't think about the human authors. We don't think about how this work was transmitted or passed down from now to us, or what sort of cultural circumstances led to their creation or led to their writing. We don't think about that sort of thing. That's difficult. That's for smart people. That's for the scholars to do. I don't consider myself a scholar. I don't consider myself a smart person. I'm just someone who thinks this stuff is important, and so I have taken the time and effort to look into it. That's it. That's what I am. That's all I am. I have no fancy degrees behind my name. I don't introduce myself saying I am so and so of so and so of so and so a place, and I have all this whole letter of alphabet, this whole alphabet of letters listed behind my name: THD, PhD, DOI, whatever. I don't know what sort of combinations of letters you can come up with now. I don't have that. I'm never going to have that. Okay, I'm just a dude. I'm just a fat, overweight, 40-year-old balding dude in a one-bedroom apartment in a small town in Southern Illinois. Absolutely nothing impressive about me, nothing fancy about me, nothing special about me, nothing unique about me, nothing privileged about me. There is nothing that I have access to that anybody listening to my voice or seeing this video does not have access to. Okay? I was curious about these things a number of years ago, so I took the time and effort to look into them. I am sharing the results of my research and the results of my inquiries with you. If you have a problem with my results, if you have a problem with the data that I'm putting forward or the explanations or commentary that I'm putting forward, feel free to come up with your own. Okay, that's what I did, and that's what you can do too. And there is nothing that I have done that you cannot also do. I have not written books. I have not been published. I have not. No, I've not given seminars. I've not given speeches. No one consults me for my expert opinion or advice on anything. Okay. I'm just a dude. I'm just a guy. All right. I am the bottom rung of the ladder, the bottom item on the totem pole. And if I can do it, you can do it. So this is an article from Peter Enns, dated January 14, 2010. He writes on a website called BioLogos. It's a Christian-based scientific website. I haven't really looked too deeply into it. I don't subscribe to different authors or different thoughts or points of view. What I'll do is I'll research topics. When I am interested in a topic or a subject, I will do a deep dive study into that topic or subject. I do not follow I do not follow the cult of personality. I do not follow certain authors or certain individuals. I don't read a book just because somebody's name is on it. I don't go to a movie just because somebody's in it. Alright, I don't do that. I have never done that. I do not have favorites. I said at the beginning of this video series, I don't have sacred cows. I don't have certain things I cling to or hold on to that I cherish. I don't have favorites. I don't really care whose name. That's why in a lot of the articles that I'm going to read, whenever I do read some, which I'm probably not going to do very often, I'll often will leave out the name because I don't care about the name. Alright. But that is who this is, okay, and if you want to look it up for yourself, the name of the article is "The Firmament of Genesis 1 is Solid, but That's Not the Point." It's from Peter Enns on January 14, 2010. I believe I got this from his website, BioLogos. You can go to Google and try that information and look this up for yourself if you want to. I'm going to read the whole article. It's about 3 pages, so I'm going to go ahead and read it. I'm going to go ahead and start a new video. Might as well.